Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening to my friend Sheldon, who's over in the UK. Hey, Craig, good to see you on the call. I just wanted to welcome you guys to the first in a series of workshops presented by ISM New Jersey and our friends at Suppeco. We're calling it Calling All Relationships. I am your host, David Johnson. I'm joined by Sheldon Mydat from Suppeco. And just really quickly, before we get into all of Sheldon's particulars, I want to tell a quick story. Let's imagine this happens to you. Your boss's boss comes to you and he says, I've read this report by Hackett that says people are seeing really great results from this supplier relationship management thing. We do that, right? And you go, yeah, of course we do that. Yeah, I think so, right? Yeah, we do. But in actuality, do you really? Do you have a full overview of your vendor base? Do you have an overview of your vendor spend? Do you have them segmented into the categories to ensure you're giving each vendor the appropriate attention they need? Maybe, maybe not. What we're going to give you today, what Sheldon and I are going to do, well, mostly Sheldon, I'm just going to stand there, ask questions, and be the eye candy for those of you watching. We're going to explore the exotic landscapes of data and spend visibility. We're going to trek through the dense jungles of supplier categorization and governance. We're going to dive into the deep waters of collaboration and scale the peaks of supplier performance. After we've navigated those adventurous terrains, we'll brave the storms of risk management before finally reaching the promised land of digitization. That's the newest region on our map, and I'm gonna let Sheldon introduce himself. But over the course of these next 4 or 5 workshops, we're going to give you a blueprint and a set of tools that you can use to build out a perfect best practice version of supplier relationship management for yourself and your organization. Now, I know just a little bit about supplier relationship management. I've built it, I've done it kind of okay. But one thing I do know is I know that I don't know everything. So I like to bring in people who happen to know way more than I do about these things. And for that, I'm going to lean on the gentleman right here, Mr. Sheldon Mydat from Suppeco. Sheldon, please tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your organization.
David, that was such an exotic preamble. That was fantastic. I feel myself drifting off somewhere. That was amazing. Yeah, great to see you again. It's been ages, right? Yeah. So background, very kind of canned version. 25 years working in procurement and supply chain. So you know, a seasoned professional in that area. Working with companies going through structural change, divestment, merger and acquisition, outsource, and of late, increasingly different flavors of digital transformation. So looking in when driving value out of those processes. And yes, I have an absolute steering towards collaborative relationship management and the additional value that can be created through fostering great relationships. And a lot more on that will come out through some of this episode and in later episodes. But besides the fact that I've obviously got Suppeco printed across my back here, and you might see that printed across some of the material that we share tonight, that is where it ends. This is really about being technology agnostic. Okay. We don't want to go off pitching technology, any type, ours or anybody else's for that matter. This is about processes, good practice processes, creating those tracks, because these relationships, let's face it, they don't happen within organizations in bubbles. You know, they don't float around on their own. They need to sit within an environment, within a structure, within a foundation or a framework that almost like tracks that they need to run on to be efficient. And you, David, you already picked up really nicely on a number of those different areas, such as governance and segmentation and visibility of data. And we can really dig into some of those areas. So that's kind of where I think we should come from. Take the technology, pitching and names out of this, apart from what it says behind me, and let's get into some of this, but do it in a way that that isn't driving right down into the weeds, because we want to be able to cover things, keep it interesting, and then we can push stuff into the next session. So that's my view. What do you think, David?
I think that's wonderful. And I think it's pretty funny that at the very start of this, we've already had a bunch of travel metaphors. We've got some stuff in the jungle, and you've got train tracks. So why don't we just buckle up and start, right? What we want to do today is give you guys an overview of, since this is the first in the series, we want to give you an overview of what you need to build out an effective supplier relationship management platform or program. I think one of the things that we should probably do, in your experience, Sheldon, what are the key components, right? I know I touched on them very basically. What are the key components and the key challenges that companies face when they try to improve their data and spend visibility, and how can they overcome it?
So the very, very first thing, before you get into anything, before you can look at segmentation, before you can look at categorizations and or governance or risk or any of those things, any of them, the first thing you need to do, and this is surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, but it's quite common, you need visibility of data. And again, I'm not talking about where you put that data, whether it's into a platform or whatever, it's some form of worksheet. It's about getting visibility of the data. Who are the suppliers? Who are they? Quite often, not all of this. You have decentralized. You have organizations that are very, very sales driven, and they're out there buying stuff as well, and it's very decentralized, clearly non-optimized, because you've got things being bought all over the place. So it's getting a view of who the suppliers are, what are they doing for you, what are you buying from them, how much of it are you buying from them. So, and this runs across all categories. So we're not talking category strategy here at this stage. We're way too early for that. This is about, okay, what are you look across your data centers, end user compute, network security, print still in there, IT services, all of the different areas of spend. If you were to break it down into towers, start to get an understanding of who sits in those towers, and document it. That's one of the first things, and we're going to actually show, and I say that at the very, very, very first, because if you don't have that data, and that includes spend, of course, so who are they? What are they selling you? How much of it? What kind of services it is? How much you're spending, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff, very, very, very important, and it's the most basic, but most fundamental. In fact, I wouldn't say basic, I'd say fundamental. It is the fundamental pillar that supports everything else that you do.
Really quickly in the chat, if you guys can just give me a quick thumbs up emoji or something like that. How many of you know exactly how many suppliers are in your world? Just a thumbs up in the chat or something like that. And if you really, really want, if you're feeling spicy, why don't you put in the number of how many suppliers you're working with right now? I can tell you at my last place, we had 5,000 full-time employees and over 11,000 suppliers. And one of my first activities was getting rid of about 8,000 of those suppliers. I'm not seeing a lot of movement in the chat. Over 8,550 suppliers. All right, Jeff. Yeah, I feel that thumbs up too. So
doesn't surprise me. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the task. Now, clearly, and you'll see this in the material that we share, and that will be made available as well afterward. You'll see, and everybody's going to be kind of familiar with the kind of the Pareto 80-20 rule. Obviously, something that looks like a pyramid with your key suppliers at the top, with your tail spend at the bottom, etc., etc. And that's all true. That's all true. And that will help start creating this flow of information, this picture of the information, and then you can start to do some really smart things, and the whole thing starts to develop. I think maybe we should put up the maturity model. What do you think, David?
Let's put up the maturity model so that everybody can see what we're talking about and working towards. Just give us a second. Sheldon's going to share this beautiful color-coded grid of maturity in the supplier relationship management maturity model. Yeah, I mean,
close down a few other windows.
John Piccola, I have lived in your shoes, my friend. I know what it's like to live in a world where you have no idea how many suppliers you have. You have a good idea, or you round it up, and then you find 2,000 more that your team in Australia is randomly using.
Yeah.
So
apologies for the delay, folks.
While we're pulling up this maturity model, Sheldon, I want you to think about my next question. Now we've got the data, right? We've got that visibility. Sorry, one second. Can you explain in a very basic way what the process of supplier categorization is and why it's important for organizations?
Is that aimed at me, or is that aimed at the audience?
That's aimed at you.
That's aimed at me. Okay, so I'm going to answer that whilst looking at this maturity model that you should be able to see on the screen. Can you see it on the screen?
Yeah.
Hopefully it's big enough. But I'm going to make it sorry?
It looks good.
Okay, fine. So there's no recreating the wheel with this maturity model, okay? You've probably seen different flavors of it, okay? The interesting thing about this one is that it now has a digitization vertical in it, which you would expect to see in a new maturity model. So, and none of these verticals are mutually exclusive. They are cross-functional. So, for example, you're looking at over here, down here, everything starts at zero, no maturity whatsoever. If you don't have any visibility of your data, there's very little you can do. You start to get an understanding of the data by doing data gathering. Again, I'm not talking about technology here. I'm not talking about that yet. We've included it, but I'm not talking about it yet. Okay, but you start going on data gathering exercises. You start to create a library of information. You set it into kind of towers, you know, technology towers. Once you start doing that, you can start to look at optimizing category spend. Okay, but as a procurement department, who are, if you like, key players in terms of that activity, they certainly aren't the only players, because procurement needs to align, needs to collaborate. And then we're starting to look over here, needs to collaborate with, for example, operational and service departments, service cohorts and team and you know, and stakeholders. Because, you know, and also the leadership. Leadership defines an organization's strategy. So that's absolutely key to category strategy. And service management, key to defining requirements. And then you look at suppliers or different services that require consumer input, direct customer input. And so you've got sales who have that direct link into, you know, downstream into the customer. So these players are very, very important in that category strategy. Okay, so that's very, very, very important. And that's why these columns are not mutually exclusive. They do interplay. They all do. They all do. And obviously, just a quick word on digitization. If you look across every single one of these, you could apply technology without naming any type of technology, whether it's risk or collaborative software or whatever it happens to be. You can apply technology, whether it be full transformation or just just injecting smart technology into some of the processes. So and that's sorry, go on.
I was going to say, let's key in on supplier segmentation, right? Because that's the next step in our our process here. We started and we've got the spend and data visibility. Now we're up to segmentation and building out that governance.
Right. So that's what I was going to. That's what I was leading. Thank you for pulling me back in there. So categorization it doesn't happen in isolation. This is why I was leading into it with category strategy, because once you start to understand category strategy, you're starting to look at which suppliers are important, which ones are more strategic, which are critical to an operation, which ones are. So you can do that in a non-scientific way, just by looking at the types of services and requirements that you have as an organization, the functional operational requirements. That's the first view. Then you start to, that gives you a flavor as to what should sit in which space. But there is obviously a much more, there needs to be a much more kind of empirical process involved in segmentation. So in the next slide, now this is kind of one of a point, various points of arrival. Depending on where you are, you will see segmentation looking, involving different names. Typically, you'll always see strategic, okay? But whether an organization, how an organization defines strategic is another matter. Some organizations look at strategic as, aligned values. Another may look at strategic as, well, this is the only type of company that we are truly dependent on, and we couldn't trade if they, if they weren't there, we'd have a real problem. I mean, that to me sounds like critical rather than strategic, but it depends where you go. And obviously you've got transactional, which is heavy licensing, and maybe leverage. I just wanted to show you this very quickly, because this is a flavor of what we're talking about. Now, in the next slide, unless there are any comments on that particular one, David.
Any comments or questions from the audience? We will be sharing this with you guys after the webinar is done, so you'll get a copy of this so you can look at it. Let's go to the next slide, and then I'll ask my question.
Right. So here is. I call it a banding calculator. So again, kind of a point of arrival. I mean, it starts up here, okay, with these three lenses: operational, reputational, financial. And you can, this is quite a simplistic version. I've worked with many different types and flavors of segmentation or categorization over the years. I wanted to show this one so we can talk through it. You can see exactly how things work, and you can mix this up. You can add another lens. You can just adjust the different calculators, just dial them all up a bit, and you'll get to the same place. You can still filter it or eliminate down to four main categories.
I think this is a fantastic visual aid to bring back to that previous slide, right, where we get our four boxes.
Yeah.
Understanding where we as procurement people and sourcing people and our leadership are going to focus their efforts. That's kind of the outcome of the supplier segmentation, right? You are building your critical and your strategic levels, right? Your major vendors, because those are the ones you want your CEOs to have top-to-top meetings with, right?
Correct.
And then your kind of tactical and commodity vendors are like, yeah, well, I could buy what I'm getting from you from anywhere, really and truly. So maybe you don't put as much focus on them. right?
That's
And
correct.
having this,
And
having this.
sorry,
Go ahead,
Dave, go on.
sorry. No. Go ahead. This is your show. I'm just.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, that's really important. You know, you do, because you've just linked back into that category strategy, and that category strategy does drive segmentation. You know, and once you've, so you can look at this from either way. You could look at that from category strategy, which involves the leadership team, as you just said, in defining how. What the direction of an organization, and then the way that as a result the procurement obviously are very, very key in driving category strategy, which then results in segmentations, et cetera, and procurement bring to the party their skills on negotiation, their skills on spend management, and savings and value creation, and market trends, all of that really, really important stuff that they bring to the table. And same thing vis-a-vis the different communities, the different stakeholder groups that face in to driving the category strategy, and that ultimately filters through to what will then turn into segmentation. That defines what sits, why something sits as a strategic, why something is critical, why tactical, and why commodity. I mean, tactical, you're typically looking at, we've been talking before, we were looking at, transactional type, heavy license, annual purchases, for example. But
I think another important thing to note is that there's going to have to be a level of judgment put against these kind of bandings, right? Because if I think about it from a priority, right? Your CFO is going to say, okay, whoever we spend the most with has to be critical. Your operations guy is like, hey, I need trucks, so our auto manufacturer or our leaser is the people we lease from is going to be a critical vendor. But your CISO, your chief information security officer, isn't going to care about either one of those. He's like, that's minor. But you know what? The guy who keeps my email safe is way more important. So I think one of the things that we should also get into, and we probably will get into when we in a later session around building and creating the relationship layer, is talking about how the segmentation and the governance models connect, and then how we have to apply our judgment across broad swaths of the organization and across categories.
Yes, and it's interesting what you say about so years, in the past, until quite recently, in fact, you'd see the heavily weighted criteria being around spend, and it still is. Don't get me wrong, but there are now other major considerations around ESG, for example, social values, emissions profiles, etc. All that stuff in that area, very, very important. That's picked up here as well, because those things hit right at they poke at a company's reputation, don't they? They drive that reputational status or risk. So very, very important areas, and the value creation from working with managed services, solution integrators, these different organizations, they are capable of driving so much value through that relationship layer. Previously, that wouldn't have been a factor. It wouldn't have really been a heavy consideration. Now it really, really is. And it's becoming more and more substantive as well, the relationship value. It's becoming, in my opinion, it's becoming increasingly hard-coded, and almost existential. If you don't drive these good relationships with your suppliers, using terms like customer choice, etc., which I think is still an absolutely valid term. Then you find yourself at the back of the queue. So, whether that makes you a critical supplier or a strategic supplier, again, it's subjective.
So I think you opened the can already. You already opened the can when we started talking about the relationship layer, right? We've got we've got our data, right? That's step one. We put it all together, we massaged it, it looks really pretty. We've got a nice Excel spreadsheet because that's what everybody does with their Excel spreadsheet if they don't
They
have
do, yeah,
the
they still
technology.
do.
Right? We've segmented our suppliers. I know who my critical suppliers are. I know who my strategic suppliers are. I know who's tactical and what's a commodity. I put all of that together. I've got my governance model and the cadence together. What can I do to promote more efficient and effective collaborations with these suppliers that I've identified? Right? How do I get better at the relationship layer?
Well, there's so much that you can do. The building blocks
at a very high level, because we want
well, I
them
mean,
to
I'm going to
for the
start
next
coming
one.
on to that in the next slide as well. I mean, the first thing you've got to do is to go through that segmentation process. And by the way, that's not a once-off thing. That's something you've got to keep repeating because things change, statuses change, supplier standings change, you know, directions and strategies for these organizations change, and they don't always remain aligned. So, you know, you've got to look at ongoing segmentation reviews and plan B. Plan B's, something that companies don't do a lot of is plan B strategies. You know, what would happen if we swapped out this organization? What if they were acquired by the competition? We need to look at a plan B approach, you know, and it's something a lot of companies, you have a, you know, a DR strategy or contingency. We know very well now what it's like to have to face contingency plans. Obviously, we've just been through the pandemic. But one thing that companies don't do a lot of is plan B strategies or plan B exercises. What happens if we need to swap out a supplier? Not because of a pandemic, but because, you know, they've been acquired by the competition. There's so much of that going on now. So it's very, very important. Anyway, so that you know, there are different elements to this work, to segmentation. So we've seen here, there are three lenses, okay? Operational, reputational, financial. There are others that you can add. You can see how this process works. Obviously, if you're looking at supply A, you put it through the lens, you put it through the operational lens, you score it. You know, I mean, I'm sure you can see exactly where this goes, but you answer these questions. Is it a 1 in operational? Is it a 1 in reputational? Is it a 1 in financial, or a 2 or a 3? You add those up, obviously that gives you your calculator. From there, you can see which is now these terms here, by the way, they are picked up in the next slide, which is talking about governance. So, but you can see that the score that you get denotes where you are, whether you are a strategic, based on criteria that you've assigned, et cetera, with these different calculators, et cetera, et cetera. There is also another way of doing it. You could go with an alternative. Now, you can band these together. You just go with a major and minor, for example. So it's a simplistic version of segmentation, of a segmentation matrix. There are some very, very complex versions of this, but they don't make for good viewing on a screen like this. And I think this is, you know, to be honest with you, you really can go down into the minutia in this kind of a process without seeing any specific or additional gains from doing so. You know, complexity loves complexity. You know, it doesn't need some things don't need to be complex. They just don't. We love complex things, spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. We don't need it. So anyway, that's that. Let me just ping on to the next slide. Bear in mind, so you're seeing these priority P1, P2, P3, P4. Okay. One of the other key.
So just for your edification, Sheldon, the IT guy in me is having a really hard time with the priority one. Priority one for me is
yeah.
Something's on fire.
We've got a catastrophic failure. All right, I get that. Fair enough. We'll change the name.
I'm kidding.
I didn't think about that. That's a good point, actually. So just flicking on to the next one. So here we've got, forgive me, P1, P2, P3, P4. Here's our kind of triangle, our pyramid, I should say. And so nothing unusual about that. You're going to typically have tail spend down here, and you go further to the top, your spend increases, and you've got your kind of 80% of the spend up here. So you know what you know how that works. So and here you are, your strategic, your critical, technical commodity suppliers. So again, simplistic version. You're probably going to have a whole raft of additional kind of governance sessions in place, but I'm only going with 3 here, okay, so that you can kind of get a flavor. Okay, so service performance reviews. This is about standardizing governance, okay? You want to standardize things where you can in order to drive efficiency and to gain efficiency from potentially resource challenged internal functions. We don't have one person marking one supplier. We've got people marking teams of suppliers, or tier 1s, tier 2 suppliers. We need to drive efficiencies here. So standardization is always a good approach where deemed appropriate. So service performance reviews, for example, on a weekly or 2-weekly basis, you've got monthly supplier relationship reviews. So as you go down to 2, you might still be operating the same monthly sessions, but then you get executive reviews. They start to push out relationship reviews for your tactical suppliers. They start to push out as well, as do your service performance reviews. And then down here you could.
I think this illustrates a great something that is really common in a lot of organizations, at least a lot of organizations that I've been in, right? You have our C-level people who are meeting with employers, with providers or suppliers that are just not that important. I had to speak to, just very recently, I had to speak to a senior executive and explain to him that he shouldn't meet with everybody who wants to meet with him. You should be a special guest star. You shouldn't be the main attraction in any meeting, right? If this is a commodity or transactional supplier, you shouldn't be in a quarterly meeting with them. You should meet with them once a year if you want to, right? And this defines, this right here defines the cadence and frequency of governance in such a beautifully illustrated way. I just wanted you to know that I appreciate that because I'm going to steal this and use this for my executives.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So look, there are more complicated versions of this. Of course there are. I mean, if you look at your traditional governance schedule in your contracts, it's pages of governance sessions with terms of reference, etc., etc. You could fill a chart like this with those meetings, and you typically would. The only thing I would say regarding digital technology nowadays, again remaining completely agnostic, is that it does mix things up in terms of functional governance, in terms of legacy governance regimes that you kind of see an example of here with your monthlies or quarterly sessions, or maybe even feeder sessions that feed on a daily basis into a number of these type of engagements. Digital technology is changing things because of its very digital and immediate nature. So there are lots of great very attractive savings associated with using digital technology to replace a legacy governance regime. You just got to look at things like time to action through running interactive sessions in real time as and when things happen. Don't get me wrong, it raises other questions as well because there's so much complexity, but there are so many gains there from digitally operated governance in today's world, by being able to do things in real time and getting a response in real time and getting actionable insights in real time. So it's a real opportunity to drive savings. Number one, against time to action, which is radically reduced down to potentially zero, or days rather than months, and time on task as well, for the same reasons, because of the time requirements are shrunk. But again, this is why digitization lives now within the maturity model as a cross-functional vertical within that assessment.
Just really quickly in the chat, to our guests, does this model look familiar to you? Just give me a thumbs up in the chat if this is something that you guys have kind of put in place in your organizations. Make Sheldon feel good about getting everybody in under the same umbrella. That's right. Thank you, John.
I mean, bear in mind that this is obviously this is a simplified version so that we can present, and I think everybody understands that this is going to be a lot more complex in reality once you start plugging in a whole legacy, a whole governance regime for a complex supply chain as well, potentially. So you've got layers. You probably have different layers of the same of governance within one supply chain. So different lenses. Clearly, you can't really present that here, but in reality, that would be the case. Which is another reason why digitization is accelerating improvements in those areas. Because as soon as you start looking at multiple layers of governance across different operations, divisions, technology, region, geographies, etc., within a supply chain, then it's increasingly hard to manage that without technology.
In the interest of time, because we are about 40 minutes in now, and I want to give everyone a chance to give a couple of questions if they have the chance. Can we move on to talking about collaboration and performance management? And
so let me flick back to that one there, because obviously so I know we're coming up to the end of we're nearing the end of the session. So I know that in the next session we want to spend a lot of time talking about collaboration and performance, for example, and maybe even onto the others. But yeah, so what I want to do is, so you look at collaboration. Okay, so typically when I've worked with organizations and we've gone through this assessment with the organization, and they've done some self-testing, or we worked through this before we together, and we kind of plot where we are, and then we implement plans and processes to climb up this kind of ladder. In the collaboration space, you're talking about internally rather than, this is about collaboration internally as well, as because you can't just start driving value with a supplier and think about collaborating unless you get your own ducks in a row, to be honest with you. And in fact, suppliers are better at collaborating than customers because they do it with multiple customers already. So, but it's very important to actually get that right. And we've talked about the importance of collaboration in terms of category strategies and segmentation and governance, obviously, because when you talk about governance, you're talking about getting the right people into the right meetings at the right time. And you just said yourself, some of the fatigue around too many people joining too many meetings. You mentioned that yourself, didn't you, before? So one of the big areas, one of the big things that we've worked on is actually understanding what an operating model looks like. So a target operating model typically looks at your organizational structure and the people within it, and who does what and who's needed to do what. So, we've looked at, we've worked with things like supplier engagement races, and stakeholder activity races, stakeholder activity integration races. So these typically look at so for example, let's talk about a supplier engagement race. So this typically looks at every conceivable reason to engage with a supplier, from idea generation all the way through to contract exit. So full life cycle, and that includes different gating processes for change and transformation as well, and all that kind of good stuff that happens in between. So you've got this full list down the page essentially. Okay, but this is about putting processes in place and building operating models. Okay, before we can start getting to these shiny glossy relationships, we've got to build the framework. And so you've got your list of engagement reasons to engage down the left of the page, and then you've got every single stakeholder within the organization that's relevant, obviously, to this, to what we're looking at here, supplier management, across the top of the page. And you literally race it, okay, in order to understand how the operating model functions and who needs to do what. So if you're coming into an organization and you don't know your first day in the organization, how do you know what you're supposed to be doing, where you plug in to an operation? So it's really, really important to do that. And it may well be the kind of thing that you don't leave on your desktop, but it's the kind of thing you'd have in your drawer. It just is. I mean, we I'll give you an example. We went through this exercise at Royal Mail Technology. In fact, we did a maturity model assessment. We did all sorts of work as part of supplier transformation. This is pre-IPO, when it was a public sector organization, just before it IPO'd. And so they went through this entire transformation. It was a transformation because they had outsourced everything, and they brought in a new CIO, and she wanted to reshore everything, build a new target operating model consisting of 453 new IT capabilities, staff, bring them in, build the operating model, race everything in supplier engagement, stakeholder activity, the whole shooting match, and build this thing from ground up. And part of what we did was creating these two very, very, very big A0 size races. So these are huge pieces of work. Not aware, and we've kind of done a lot of the work, so it's done now. So we've kind of repurposed it many, many times, and we can make those available as well, of course. But it was really, really interesting because these races were both presented to the board. We had this kind of heads of state meeting. I remember it now, and everybody really appreciated everything that we've done. But funnily enough, one of the main things that came out of it, somebody stood up and said, "Well, you know what? This just means we need to pick up the phone more. We need to talk to each other. That's what we need to do." Now, that obviously that's kind of trite. Yes, we do, but you still do need to put in the work and actually understand the wiring within an organization. Collaboration has a very, very meaningful side to it. It's a buzzword, but if it's not done properly, it's meaningless. It's just a talking shop. So there is a very, very meaningful side, an impactful side to getting collaboration right. And that's before you've even started speaking to your suppliers.
Yeah.
Which I want to get into next time.
As we look towards future, sessions, defining the relationship layer coming up on August 24th is where we kind of start to take the deep dive into moving from the limited, the lower half, the bright red pieces of this maturity model, and giving you that blueprint of how you can get to the higher level of implementing and utilizing SRM to improve your supplier collaboration, to improve your supplier performance, and kind of minimize those supplier risks, right? We're very, very hopeful that you guys will continue to come with us on this journey across the tracks and travel with us through the jungles and the mountains of supplier relationship management. And we want to thank you very much for. So
we can make this available, can't we, David, as well? So let me come off share for now. We
will make this this background information available to you guys. We'll figure out how to do it. It'll either be on LinkedIn or perhaps Kathy will send it out to everyone here. We loved having you. Thank you so much for interacting with us. Sheldon, thank you so much for walking us through this and
been a pleasure.
Leading us. And I will see you guys in just about 2 months. I don't know if you know, but Sheldon and I like to talk. We like to talk to each other. We can go on and on for hours about supplier relationship management, about technology and everything. So if there are anything that you guys want us to key in on. If we say something that you need a greater explanation on, or if you need a deeper dive into, put it in the chat. Raise your hand, ask a question, because we will definitely respond and we'll definitely look at it to try and do a deeper dive. Thank you again so much for coming, everyone. Thank you so much, Sheldon, for your time and attention to detail and your intelligence.
Been a pleasure. Reach out and connect. Let's carry on the discussion. I love it. And as we said, we will make the material from this session and future sessions available as well. Yeah, awesome. Thanks very much, David.
I'll see you guys in a couple of months, August 24th.
Looking forward to it.